Louise Lansdown, welcome to Beyond Stage Fright. Now, you're head of strings at Birmingham Conservatoire, and you previously worked as senior lecturer in strings at the Royal Northern College of Music and had teaching positions at the University of Manchester at Sheetham School of Music. You're the founder and president of the British Viola Society, and you've given viola papers in viola congresses all around the world. You're the Director of Chamber Music at Procorder, and in 2007 you were a jury member on the panel of the Melbourne International Chamber Music Competition. With all this experience of teaching and working at conservatoire level, do you feel that students have a lot of issues with performance stress and performance anxiety?
I think where the students enter at undergraduate and also postgraduate level, they come with a different array of hang-ups and issues that perhaps prevent them from performing at their best. And actually, after all, a lot of hard work, they often don't play as they might do in, say, an audition or performance situation. So yes, I think that is the case. Particularly with younger students, often you find those who are very much naturally gifted, very, very often at age 18, they're not scared yet. So they often come in not really having understood how good they are, how they manage to do things. And I think often the complexity of a conservatoire environment brings those, the sort of difficulties, the humanity, the emotions a bit to the fore. Whereas those students perhaps who haven't had such an easy time of being able to learn an instrument and have struggled and perhaps have faced performance opportunities that are not positive, haven't won things easily, they already enter conservatoire with less confidence perhaps and less idea of self. They don't have such a strong sort of feeling that they can go in and feeling invincible, which I think students who are very, very natural, at least for a certain period, they don't struggle, seemingly, with performance nerves and stress and anxiety in the same way as people who perhaps have struggled. I think the other side of the coin is that you often find that the distinction between those students who've been to specialist music schools and those who have been to perhaps just normal schools but have had a good music education but still perhaps not benefited from the intensity and the very high level of education at a specialist music school, you find that they have an inferiority complex coming into a conservatoire. So very often you'll find that those students feel that even though they might be playing the same repertoire, they actually might play just as well as the students from, the specialist music schools, but actually they feel like they don't have that, upper hand, as one might say. There is this unspoken hierarchy amongst students, and in some ways actually having an incredibly international group of students helps dissipate that, because there isn't the same structure or specialist music school arena in every country. So in a way they have no idea where they stand, which is sort of better. And so if you have an eclectic group of 20 nationalities, there isn't the same hierarchy as if you have a whole bunch of UK students piled in together, and the one knows that they come from a postcode which is X, and the other knows that they've studied at the Menuhin School and that they've got the upper hand, and the expectation is that they're going to do fantastically. I think that has quite a lot to do with confidence. And if I may speak sort of frankly about snobbery and about the way the music profession works, I think the UK has quite a lot to answer for in terms of how it measures its hierarchy in terms of education. And I think that has a whole lot to do with a lack of confidence and often students entering conservatoire feeling like they're not as good as others, and that has a lot to do with money, and that has a lot to do with parental background. And I think often you find that students who have musician parents or perhaps very culturally educated parents tend to be slightly wealthier, and this sounds like a total cliche, but actually those students coming in who've perhaps only had group lessons at school and maybe only started private lessons just before entering conservatoire, that there really is a very huge difference and a huge divide. They may not have played much chamber music, they may not have much good orchestral experience, they perhaps haven't played in the National Youth Orchestra. You know, there's a whole myriad of extracurricular activities that one could do if you're quite rich before getting to conservatoire, and they cost a lot of money. And, you know, I think those students who haven't had that really feel that when they get to conservatoire. That can be a real confidence breaker. Often you find those students who perhaps come from quite out of the way places that maybe haven't had a very fancy education, they're like really big fish in their area, and they arrive at a conservatoire with a certain level of confidence, which is good, but within weeks you can see that just disintegrate because they realize that they're from X place and they were the best, but actually compared to so-and-so and so-and-so who's had this and that, they don't even feature. So suddenly I think the bottom falls out of their world in a way, because they realize they see themselves in a much bigger world, in a much bigger context, and they see how perhaps small their contribution seems to make to all of this mass of talent around them. I think that's part of growing up too. You realize yourself, you contextualize yourself, but I think that often takes 4 years to remedy. After those 4 weeks when they realize that they're, you know, at whatever stage.
How does that play itself out?
That plays itself out in a whole mixture of things. Sometimes students become less motivated. They feel like there's no point. Sometimes they realize that they have to change everything about the way they play, so that when they get up and perform, often it's more scary because they're doing it with different technical outcomes, technical expectations. There really is an expectation in conservatoire that you have to have technical prowess and ease and dexterity in order to be able to do well in a performance. And I mean, to a greater degree, that is true. And the music profession is pretty cruel, because you're only as good as your last performance. So if you have a bad one several times in a row, and you know, often students are terrified when it gets to their first assessment, even though we try to make it not terrifying, but their first assessment is usually a technical one, so they have to play scales and studies and orchestral excerpts, and they get into the room, and those people who perhaps are quite sort of well adjusted and have managed to do a lot of great work and change stuff in their playing, perhaps can pull that one off. Some people have never ever played scales. Some people have never played scales in front of another human being other than their teacher. And the expectation is that they also play something from memory, one of their studies. So that's hard too. Lots of people may not have done that. So I think it manifests itself differently, and one hopes that each teacher is sensitive to that and will get their students to practice that. But I think there's nothing like the exam room to test you for those very, very difficult kind of emotions that they would go through.
So what would you as a conservatoire do to support students in this whole area?
There are a few things. We have a marvellous lady called Karen O'Connor, who is a performance coach, that many of the students see actually when they're feeling at their best rather than at their worst, and who she works with wonderfully. We also have various sessions on stage choreography, stage manner, working on, you know, I mean, those are the sort of exterior kinds of things. And I have organised a lot of performance opportunities that have nothing to do with assessment. So knowing what it feels like to play without pressure. So just wanting to play your best rather than playing because you think you're going to fail an exam, and if you don't play at your absolute best. So there are various of those. They include chamber music opportunities, and often students can sooner rise to their best within a chamber music context because they feel like they're a bit supported, there's someone else there. And performance opportunities within instrumental classes, performance classes, master classes, and we have what's called like concerts in camera. So they're basically concerts that are not open to the public and just to fellow students in a performance venue, and they're completely unthreatening and very, very informal. So the idea is to introduce performance in a way that is not terrifying, that you can do often, and that it doesn't have any bearing on your degree. You don't feel like you're losing something if you don't play your best. So there are those things. I would say that students who are scared wouldn't even want to take part in any of those. So it takes quite a lot of cajoling and sensitivity from a teacher to get students to do that. So, at its worst, students will avoid performing at all costs until it gets to the exam, and then they'll probably go in and have an absolute disaster. And at its best, one can slowly but surely try to encourage students who you know are worried and scared and who are affected very negatively by, nerves. At its best, you can slowly but surely get them to become more and more involved.
How often do you feel that you can get the students who've had less advantages before they've come to the conservatoire? How often do you feel that you can get them to really make those shifts, and can they ever end up with the same degree of confidence as the specialist music school kids and the people who've had lots of positive experience beforehand?
Yeah, I would say they do. They certainly can, and they do. It often takes quite intuitive zoning in on the areas where their weaknesses are, or that they don't know as much as perhaps some of the other students. And then you sort of have to leave some of it up to their curiosity and passion for their chosen field. And you also have to try to sort of help them to really grasp where their pockets of knowledge are that they don't really, that they just don't have the same kind of level of, what's the word? I can't quite think of the right word now, but where they sort of empty spots are, and help them to zone in on those and show them why if they zone in on those, it's going to elevate and what they do so much and why. So I think it has to be quite pragmatic, and it's quite difficult because you have, say, 40 students coming into year one, all at whole staggered different array of levels. And so on one level, their teacher has got to fill in all the gaps in terms of their playing, but then the conservatoire has to fill in all the gaps in terms of orchestral knowledge and preparation and understanding chamber music, and then of course all the academic and performance work that goes with it. I think that they eventually overtake those students who seemingly come in with all guns blazing, and I don't know, they've just not had the same opportunities, but often once given the opportunity, they have real kind of fire to actually, make it work. So maybe the confidence at the beginning is a little bit less, and you may find that often in the first sort of year or two of undergraduate study, it's like simmering and building, and you wouldn't necessarily notice kind of a rocket-like progression But I think that often those students who are very serious and really, really want to do it, you'll see in year 3 and 4 of undergraduate study, they really take off, and in that instance, sometimes overtaking the the specialist music school students. And it's interesting because often specialist music school students come quite jaded. They arrive at conservatoire a little bit jaded, slightly sick of structure and institutional kind of hectic pushing. And in a way, sometimes they have more complex performance hang-ups because they've been pushed, and perhaps when they didn't want to be, not all, but some, and had very bad experiences. Perhaps they were not the best at the specialist music school, which I think has its own array of horrific problems. But I suppose what surprises me a lot about students coming to a conservatoire, which in itself hopefully implies that you're going to be a performer, is that actually a lot of people don't want to perform because they're terrified. So I think they all love music, but the thought of playing it is galling for some people, which seems to be a bit self-defeating when you're coming to a conservatoire.
So how do you help students prepare for a performance?
We try to emulate what will ultimately be expected in the music profession, but we try to gently make our way there through the 4-year period. So, but in order to get there, it has to be quite formal. You have to expect certain things. You have to have criteria that they get marked against. I think often the difficulty is that students, they're so, like any human being, they don't realize, unless they've had an experience, how they have to prepare for it. So the problem is that you can't know until you've had a bad experience how you respond to it. So very, very often, it's a little bit like leaving an essay till the night before. So you're probably not going to write your best essay if you do an all-nighter, but they pretty much all do all-nighters, okay? And in a way, I think that their practicing reflects that too. So it's not because they don't work hard, because I think lots of them practice hard each day. I think the problem is that they often don't practice performing in their practice. So your expectations in your own practice room and how you prepare, what you expect of yourself is too low for too long. And then it gets to the week before and you have this 30-minute recital or whatever it may be that you have to play and be judged upon. And maybe some of them have never played it through. Maybe they have never actually really put themselves in a psychological state of high-powered adrenaline in their practice and imagined what it would be like to be in the room playing. Maybe they just don't know the piano score very well if that's what they have to do. So adding that dimension to it is like it's like another person playing your recital with you and you have no idea what you're doing. And I think that is a lot of stress and anxiety is to do with preparation, and I just don't think you could know that until you have done that. You can't explain that to somebody. You can only know that after you've felt it. I think that feeling of it went horrifically, or it was such a mess, or it wasn't at all what I wanted it to be, I could have played so much better, it's because they didn't really know how to prepare. And I think because each of us is so different, some people are quite passive, other people are incredibly excited, and if you don't know how you respond in that situation, and if your preparation was quite poor or not as it should have been, you could have a dreadful experience which would set you back. And I think that's what happens. So it's sort of up to me and the people who teach to try to explain what it means to prepare for something and how to prepare. And all we can do is be as encouraging and hopefully as have enough information and support leading up to things that would enable students to prepare for at their very, very best, and make sure that the environment in the room is as accommodating and flexible as it can be. But you can't take away from the fact that when they leave Conservatoire, they've got to go into an audition room and they have to produce the goods. And there's going to be 100 other people who can do it better than them if they go and screw up.
So tell me a bit about the differences between being an undergraduate and a postgraduate.
I wouldn't say that we deal with it that differently for the postgraduate students, because I think the preparation that we try to help them with is relevant to their level and what they have to do afterwards. I'd just say that for the actual postgraduate students themselves, the stress is that they know they have to find work. They've understood that they've done a degree already. And I think the stress is that they don't feel good enough because they've really realized what it's like to do an orchestral audition. They've really realized how tough it is to perhaps play outstanding chamber music. They've been through 4 years of playing recitals and technical assessments and orchestral auditions behind a screen, and they get it now. And now they know what it's about. They're more scared in a way because they also have an idea of, they might have done like professional schemes with orchestras. They may have done teaching placements. They may have done education workshops, and they actually know that they now have to start delivering a professional level. And I think in some ways, people are at their most terrified when they leave college, they leave Conservatoire, and during their postgraduate time, because they realize that they're on borrowed time, that lots of people actually don't work as hard as they should have done in undergraduate. They then completely realize the error of their ways, try to make up for it in 2 years of postgraduate study so that they might get themselves ready for the work environment. And a lot of people end up being so terrified by the audition round. There aren't that many orchestral positions going anyway, and if they're lucky enough to get an audition for an orchestra, tutti job or whatever it might be, or extra work, very, very, very often, because they realize that, how terrifying it is and what the level of preparation is and the expectations, then, they often don't actually play at their best. So, I think there's a duty of care in terms of us at the conservatoires, preparing students to be scared, to understand the level that they have to play at, but also to guide people wisely, because often that actually isn't what they're meant to be doing. And there are so few orchestral jobs, and often they don't make people that happy. Some people are ecstatically happy playing in an orchestra, other people just aren't. And it isn't the only way that you can have a wonderful career in music. And you can still play music and perform, but you can still find a way to do that that's much more comfortable for you. I think that's the beauty of the music profession, that there isn't only the soloist route, or the high-powered chamber music group, or the freelance or full-time orchestral musician. There are 1,000 other things that you can do and still be completely immersed in music and performing, that you don't have to feel like you're being threatened or having, having Big Brother staring at you. Because I think it's highly, highly competitive, and there are very, very few jobs. And there are very, very few people who get them.
What specific strategies do you use to help people bridge that gap between the end of their time at Conservatoire and going into the profession?
So I think at that stage we try to give them as many real life opportunities as possible, but ones that are still protected by us, if that makes sense. So it isn't quite as, so for example, maybe some students would be on a scheme where they would be playing in CBSO for several weeks. So they'd be sitting next to a member of the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and they would be mentored. But they would go to all the rehearsals, but they wouldn't necessarily play in the concert. But they then might audition, do a mock audition for the principal player, for example. But that's someone that they will already know, who has already had some communication with them. So it's not this, it is the big, it is a real life situation, but it's already someone that's familiar. They've already been in that situation. They've already had mentoring from someone in the section. So I'd say that that's a sort of somewhere in between, because if you go to an orchestral audition, you probably don't know anyone, you just go into a room, you play, you leave. And it's pretty cold. You know, I think it's worse than a job interview. You barely even speak to anybody, and you're in and out, you know, and you just play and go. And that's that. So I think those sorts of things, and the same with teaching. You might shadow somebody, someone might mentor you, they might give you feedback, they talk to you about what you're doing. You might see a whole myriad of different examples of what there is out there in terms of teaching expectations and levels, and then you're allowed to do some teaching yourself. You're then given feedback. I think that those are the sorts of things, and the same with sort of education workshops and performances.
So what do you see when you see a student who's come through all of the 4 years or however long it's been at conservatoire level, and they've gone through, they've faced their demons and they've worked through all of this stuff, and then they give an electrifying concert at the end, or recital, you know, final recital at the end of their time? What do you see?
Well, you just see a fully fledged human being, musician, who's able to enjoy the fruits of their own determination and hard work, and it's you can feel that with those tools, even if they have a bad day, that they would be able to recover, get up, understand enough about themselves that it's okay to have a bad day, and it's wonderful when they know what it's like to have a good day. I think it's very important to know that you can. So I think the important thing is that by the time you leave conservatoire, it's very, very important that you know that you can. So that if the can't moments are there, and they happen, but you know that the can, and definitely can, is there and stronger. I think that's more on balance. That's what we would love to be able to achieve for each student, and that they know how to get to the can. I think that's important. And they know themselves. So it is a bit of an emotional journey, I'm sure, for everybody. But I think that within the conservatoire experience, realizing that playing music isn't an international competition, and that there is a niche for each person, and that you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and it's very, very, there's nothing better than seeing someone play at their best, and particularly somebody who you know who maybe didn't find it very easy to get there in the first place. So I think that's why we exist. Otherwise, it would be a pretty fruitless profession, I have to say.
Louise Lansdown, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Charlotte.